School safety, student voices, and the gun debate in Michigan and across the country. Plus, a one Detroit closer look at the plans in the running for the West Riverfront. Nolan Finley and Stephen Henderson are joining me, and MiWeek is coming right up.
Did you know Roush Enterprises was selected by Google to assemble a test fleet of 100 prototype self-driving cars in 2015? It also produced the new Domino's delivery cars. And speaking of Domino's, Domino's sells well over 2 million pizzas per day around the world, and half of their sales are digital. These are just some of the ways Michigan's pioneers started out as small companies with big ideas.
We are business leaders for Michigan. We are committed to making Michigan a top 10 state for jobs, personal income, and a healthy economy. Masco Corporation is proud to manufacture innovative and environmentally friendly products for the home. Delta faucets, craft-made in Merillat cabinets, and Behr brand paints have all been designed with you in mind. Masco and its family of companies, serving Michigan communities since 1929. Funding for this program is provided by Delta Airlines. Keep climbing.
Hi there and welcome to MiWeek. I'm Christy McDonald. Thanks so much for joining me. As the Olympics wind down and we dodge potholes, this week the country is engaged in heated conversations about school safety and what gun regulations we should and shouldn't have. Coming up on MiWeek, a thoughtful debate over school safety in Michigan, what some schools are doing now, plus the engagement of students from Parkland, Florida on social media and beyond has really changed the conversation of school shootings and what is being talked about statewide and in D.C. about regulations, and will it go beyond talk? Plus, we have a One Detroit look at the 4 plans being considered for the 22-acre development along the West Riverfront. It's the latest project from the Riverfront Conservancy. It is all coming up, so let's bring in our MiWeek contributors, Nolan Finley of the Detroit News and Stephen Henderson of WDET Public Radio. Hey, guys, I know it was tough to get here today to the studio because of all the pothole patching that has been happening on every area freeway that you can find, which is actually a good thing. Annoying, but a good thing, right?
At least they're out doing it.
We need about 100 more of them out there.
So Nolan's idea actually for the show was to send, he wanted a correspondent to go out to be live at a tire shop. Is that what we should have done?
You've got a lot of people out there mad because their tires are busted.
You need a lot of
or their
bleeping for that
suspensions are tore up, or their rims are bent. You got a lot of angry people out there, and it'd be good to hear from them. But, you know, when Governor Snyder was pushing for that gas tax bill, that's exactly what he tried to tell people. He said, you're going to pay, you can pay here now a few dollars at the pump or a few cents at the pump, or you can pay at the tire shop, and that's where people are lined up today.
It's a good thing that we have a 21st century infrastructure report that's sitting somewhere in the Capitol and gathering maybe a little bit of dust there.
So we do these emergency patches. The legislature fast-tracked $175 million for pothole repair and relief. That is not a thoughtful approach.
It's not budgeting, no.
But it's taking care of the fix that has to be taken care of right now. When you can see the metal underneath the road exposed in a huge crater.
Yeah, but you know, they put the patch in, the patch comes out. They put the patch in. That's not a fix.
Well, and what we were talking about before the show is, why does Ohio not have this problem? And not just on the turnpikes where, you know, they have tolls that pay for road maintenance on the turnpikes, but on 75. 75 is the same road in Ohio that it is here, and it is not at all the same road, right? It's like glass. No. So what are they doing that we're not doing? They have the same truck traffic that we do, because you got to drive a truck through Ohio.
What about
to
weight
get to
limits?
Michigan.
They have different weight limits than we do?
The truck's not unloading at the border.
No.
You know, so I mean, you can close your eyes, and I frequently do.
Please
and
don't do
drive
this.
down 75, and you know exactly when you hit Ohio, because instead of going, you go,
Yeah, the reenactment actually is priceless, and don't try this at home. Don't close your eyes and drive at the same time.
But we do. I mean, there is some substantive difference. It's either how much money they're paying or the way that they're making.
Or the way that they're
freeze and thaw in Toledo.
They have the same thing.
They've got salt in Toledo. I don't know what's going on.
This is the next investigative report for you, Nolan, going down to Ohio and doing an in-depth study on what they make their roads out of and comparing it.
I might just do it. We can just
stop
the work crews.
It's going to be a MiWeek One Detroit exclusive. All right. Well, let's get to the big conversation that's been going on around the country this week. You know, when I heard about the shooting in Parkland, Florida last week, and I had to talk to my children about it, and I sat here and I thought, is this going to be different than the mass shootings that we've talked about in the past, whether it happened in Las Vegas and what happened in Orlando 2 years ago? Will this be any different? And the one thing that, yes, it is different is really the galvanization of these young people who have not said we're victims. Now they want something done, and they're using social media in a way that I don't think we've ever seen young people use before. And sometimes young people get this knock of not being engaged or not knowing what's going on. You are seeing a new generation of kids who are saying, we don't feel safe, and it's up to you people to make decisions so that we are. That's what really has changed for me in watching this entire debate. I'm going to start with you, Stephen, on what you've kind of experienced in your reaction.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this I don't know if you are able to yet call it a movement, but certainly a reaction to this by the kids who were involved and now attracting other young people is significant. It's important.
When do you think it changes from a reaction to a movement? How would you measure that?
I think the sustaining momentum is the thing that you talk about in a movement, right? Something that goes beyond a single incident and becomes an issue all itself. And I don't know if we're about to see that or not. I also had to explain this to my children because the news of Parkland broke while I was in the car with them, driving them home from school. It was the first time for me that I learned of a shooting involving children with my own children sitting that close. And it does make you think differently about it. I kept thinking in the car about the parents who were at that moment going up to that school or going to the hospital to try to determine if their kids were one of the ones who were killed. This is not a reasonable way to conduct life in this country, and the idea that we quote unquote can't do anything about it or that anything should be off the table in our effort to do it, I think is pretty absurd. And that's what these kids are saying is you have to do something, and we don't want you to sort of couch that in these other sort of restraints that historically have prevented us from doing anything.
Yeah, and I think that though the have to do something has to be very, very nuanced, because we're talking about school safety and what does that really involve, and then we're talking about gun control or different kind of regulations at the federal level, but then we're really seeing the action happening at the state level. You look at what different states have done, and especially Connecticut in different ways, their ban on assault weapons, and then we're talking about mental health issues, Nolan. So you know, I feel like we're back to where we have always been in talking
up against each other because you know, it's very easy, and it sounds like a great solution. We're going to expand background checks to make sure that we keep guns out of the hands of people with mental illness problems, and then you have advocates for the mentally ill step up and say, wait a minute, you know, what about privacy violations? What about stigmatization? I mean, there are that's a legitimate concern.
It
is, and you know, that's why the ACLU and other advocacy groups oppose the Obama administration executive order on keeping or taking guns away from elderly senior citizens who needed help with their daily business. You know, if you asked for help with your financial affairs, you had to give up your guns, and you know, the ACLU wasn't comfortable with that. Other groups weren't comfortable with that. There are measures, though, I think, we're starting to talk about this. Set apart the kids, you know, that's a very powerful, very emotional response, and I'm sure the gun lobby, the gun control lobby is going to put a lot of money behind sustaining that, but that's not where the real solutions are going to come from. I was impressed with what President Trump did yesterday in meeting with the White House with a whole lot of different people and listening to their ideas, and then saying, I'm going to go out and talk to the governors, because there are things we can do and we can get consensus on. You hear the NRI saying, bump stocks, yeah, we support banning bump stocks. Well, let's start there and see what the next step would be.
Right.
The NRA supports, and has for a long time, expanded background checks. You've got to expand those background checks in a way that you don't stigmatize people who are getting treatment for mentally ill and for mental illnesses, but you have to distinguish between those and, you know, folks like this kid who were in Florida, the shooter in Florida, who were clearly a danger to other people, and lots of people knew that.
But a danger on what level, and where was it categorized, and where was it written down?
So here's the thing that no one wants to talk about, and that I think you can't get at solving this problem without reaching into, is the proliferation of guns themselves, right? Does it make sense for there to be 300 million guns in a nation of 300 million people? Now, that's the reality, right? That's the truth right now. We can't go back and undo that, but are we completely helpless to imagine that there maybe could be less, or that we could do things that would lower that number? And certainly lowering the availability of guns is part of the, and that's where the NRA, that's where you get crosswise with the NRA.
The number of guns in this country has doubled over the last 20 years.
It has.
Oh my God. Gun violence has decreased 50%.
Yes, it has.
I don't know that the only solution is less guns. And if you focus on,
but see, there you
if
go.
you start
and there you go.
on,
now you say only solution. I didn't say anything about only solution. Nobody's talking about only this or that.
But
and that's
if you put the focus
that the gun rights advocates
put the focus on banning
to.
guns and taking away guns, you get
the
nowhere.
focus got to be on all of it.
What you see, starting to see differently this time, is people are talking about solutions that might work. In terms
they
of
all might work in concert is the point, and there's certain
any one of them might help. But you have
so then why can't we talk about the number of guns?
So what would you do? How would you reduce the number of guns?
What about gun buybacks and melting them down when we do that? But I mean real incentives to get guns off the streets. What about restricting the sale of certain types of weapons?
We've tried that. We had a 10-year ban on assault weapons. It didn't work.
Well, because
Washington, the city of Washington,
it didn't work how?
It didn't decrease the number of mass shootings.
But it decreased the number of assault weapons that were on the street at that point.
And it had no effect.
Well, and what it's
so do you want real solutions or solutions that make you feel good?
Hang on. Let's talk about maybe a graduated solution plan here. I think that there's still a lot of question as to why an 18-year-old can get their hands on an AR.
And so there's a solution you could support.
You have to be 21 to be able to get a handgun.
Okay, and so you reconcile that, and I think you could build support for that.
Why should anyone be able to?
Hang on one second. Let him finish.
I think those are the ideas you could start to build support for. You're starting to hear people talk about clip sizes and capacity of magazines. I think you can build support around that. But when you start talking about we're going to ban certain classes of guns, or we're going to take guns away, or whatever, that's where the conversation.
Okay, hang on one second.
What's the reason to sell an AR-15 to anyone? What's the reason for that?
What's the reason to sell any gun to anyone?
Well,
how is it any different?
That's a gun.
How is it any different than a Ruger 30-30? What makes it any different?
So should I be able to go? Should I be able to go buy a shoulder rocket as well? Why not?
Well, you can't buy those weapons. There's certain weapons you can't buy.
Why?
But you tell me how that AR-15 or that AK-47 is different than the Ruger hunting rifle that's in every.
I guess I don't want to draw. I don't want to have to draw that distinction.
Tell me what the difference is.
What I want to say is
it's cosmetics.
It's not cosmetic.
It's cosmetic.
You were talking about clip size. You're talking about the number of shots.
That's different than the gun itself.
But
so why don't you deal with things that would make that gun less dangerous?
Certain guns shoot those clips, and others don't. I mean, you don't own guns that do that.
So
right?
You don't know what I own. So why? So
you're a hunter. You're not.
You could limit.
Not using that for hunting.
You could. Some people do. Some people certainly do. Yeah. You could limit the clip size and neuter that gun.
My point is.
So why not talk about something?
Hang on one second, Nolan. Hang on one second, Nolan. I think, and I don't want to take the point out of your mouth here, but I think when you look at it was a gun that was designed to be used militarily to kill people. That's where they say that
guns kill people.
Exactly. Yeah. So then the question that people have then is why is there a difference between an 18-year-old getting a hold of a gun versus a 21-year-old and getting a hold of a handgun? A 3-day waiting period versus no waiting period.
There are things we can come to agreement on if we deal with facts and reality. Rifles are responsible for less than 3% of the homicides in this country. Knives kill more people than rifles. Are we focusing on the right thing? The majority of mass shootings, the majority of homicides are committed by pistols.
Right.
And all the conversation this week is about assault rifles.
Let me take.
And they're used in less than 15% of
Let me take this one step further because I think that we see that there can be some consensus on some small issues here. Right. Something that has disturbed me in the conversation this week is talking about arming teachers. So when we talk about school safety, I mean, we've had a lot of conversation about guns and waiting periods and the background checks and the nuance of that and mental health. But when we start talking about how safe our schools are, and will making our schools, by making them safer, does that mean putting guns in the hands of teachers who are there? And I'm going to start with you on that, Stephen.
No, I think that's crazy. I mean, and again, only in a country, though, and we got to start talking about this as well, not just the number of guns, but the history of arms and violence and weapons in this country. This is the most violent country ever to exist on this planet. It was born out of a revolution. It has fought a war over bondage with itself. It's fought many other wars around the globe, and it is still the only nation in the world to ever use a nuclear weapon against another nation. That is part of our DNA, and that is part of what drives this and makes us so different from other countries. I think in order to get to the idea of a society with less violence and less weapons, fewer weapons, we got to confront that history of who we are as well. And that's also freighted with race and class and gender and all these other things that no one wants to really talk about. So all of these things are connected.
So you don't believe teachers should be armed?
I don't believe teachers should be armed. I believe most people should be armed.
And you do not believe it as well?
I think that's probably a more reasonable discussion than dissolving the nation. I don't think teachers should be armed, but I do think we should have better security in schools. I think you should have armed security guards, trained people. It's not just about, you know, a teacher might know the mechanics of a gun. You need somebody trained in a situation.
So you're saying every, high school? Are we going to go to elementary schools, middle schools? That every school should have armed security guards?
I would put security in every school because
who pays for
this has hit every school. We're going to have to pay for it the same way
we do it in urban schools already.
There's metal detectors.
We're going to have to pay for it the same way we pay for everything else. I mean, if it's important to us, we're going to have to
borrow the money, right?
I mean, education, schools have budgets, and if security should be a priority, a budget priority. And I don't think, you know, my workplace, I have to swipe to get in. You know, why should I be able to walk in a school and check in at the office? By that time, it's too late. So I think we need to tighten security in schools, including guards.
Okay, so I think we brought up some really valid points here of discussion. My fear is that a week from now, 2 weeks from now, we're not going to be talking about this anymore, because the fact that, I mean, the president even talked about banning bump stocks. I mean, that was a Vegas shooting conversation back in October, and it didn't get anywhere. I'm concerned that you hear the passion from these young people. You're having lawmakers come out and say emphatically, we need this or I need this. Is it actually going to go anywhere? Are we actually going to see anything?
No, I think it will. And I think if you keep the conversation focused on these things that might work, and you know, you don't try to attach a whole lot of other things to them. If you say, we're going to ban bump stocks, we're going to limit clips, we're going to expand background checks, I think you can get votes in Congress for those. If you stick to those measures, I think you can get some action, and they might actually work.
And I think at the state level, you might see some different action as well.
You're talking about quarter turns. The issue is the prevalence of and proliferation of weapons in this society from the beginning to now, and the uses for those weapons from the beginning to now. This is not accidental. This is sort of an intentional outgrowth of the founding of this country, and I think we got to. And if that becomes, talk about that.
If that becomes a conversation, yeah, nothing will get done.
Well, and it's going to be very interesting to see how this next generation tackles this, because they're
grown up with.
They're all growing up with
and that'll be their choice and their responsibility when they get in those.
I will look forward to see where that goes from there. All right, now to a One Detroit closer look at the 4 plans on the table for the West Riverfront. Design firms presented the final proposals to the Detroit Riverfront Conservancy a few weeks ago. They're on display in downtown Detroit in detail so people can have a look for themselves and see the ideas to transform 22 acres of waterfront land for public recreation and use. So we thought we'd meet up with John Gallagher. He's a columnist for the Detroit Free Press to give us some insight on the plans. And John has a keen eye for design. He's also written several books on urban development and Detroit. And watching the development along the waterfront over the last 10 years, it's interesting to see the impact on the city, how we experience the water, and how it all ties into Detroit's growth. Take a look.
This is one proposal that I thought was very interesting. I love sort of the mounds over here. Playing with the terrain in this way. Detroit has a 22-acre site on the riverfront west of downtown, west of Cobo, west of Riverfront Apartments. For many decades, this was a rail yard. Later, it was an industrial site. It's been vacant for a long time. It's owned by the Detroit Riverfront Conservancy, which is the nonprofit that runs the Riverwalk. And Detroit's made the big decision, the right one, to keep this as public parkland and not turn it over to private development, as a lot of cities would have done. This is more valuable to Detroit and to Detroiters as a public amenity, that the waterfront is the most valuable amenity we have, and it belongs to all Detroiters, and so that's why we want to keep it as a public parkland. It's also viewed as an economic development tool, that once we create this public amenity here, that will generate new economic development, new interest in this portion of the city west of downtown, especially in the Riverfront corridor, which is now underused. Here you see basketball courts. All of these 4 plans include a lot of the same elements. They're all going to have fishing piers, picnic areas, splash parks for the kids, sculpture gardens, barbecue areas, playgrounds, and a lot of vegetation.
We went to Chicago, New York, and Philadelphia to benchmark other parks to see what would go in a national park, in a world-class park, things that aren't here already, things that people might see in other places and want to bring to Detroit. People liked affordable amenities. People liked this idea that they could go to a park with their families, with their siblings, with their parents, and have fun for affordable prices.
I think the most interesting element is that all of these proposals are talking about working with the topography and changing that, so what takes a relentlessly flat parcel right now and creating these hills and mounds and dips to create some more interesting landscape features, as Detroit had originally when the French got here 300 years ago, before we bulldozed everything flat. So I think that's pretty interesting. The 4 teams are headed by 4 of the really world-class landscape architects and designers. The people who designed the High Line in New York City, the famous High Line, have a proposal here. The people who have designed Millennium Park, Maggie Daley Park in Chicago, and Brooklyn Bridge Park in New York. These are the level of people that are proposing to build this here. So this is likely to generate a lot of interest internationally in Detroit's waterfront. The big question is, which team works best with the city and the Riverfront Conservancy? As they say, they're not picking a proposal, they're picking a team, because all these proposals are just preliminary thoughts about what should be there. And so once they pick the team later in the spring, they'll work with their initial proposal and then refine that over the next couple of years.
I think specifically it'll have the greatest impact on our youth. They're very keyed into this idea that Detroit is now a place where people want to live. I do think in my generation, I'm 26, there has been this idea that there's opportunity elsewhere and that there's no opportunity here. I do think with this park and with this project and with all the projects that are happening down here, perception is changing about what is possible in Detroit.
The more we return the waterfront to the people in Detroit, then the more it becomes a world-class amenity that has an existence beyond the city itself.
I think the plans are really interesting to go ahead and take a look, and people are able to. It's in the 1001 Woodward building that you can go and take a look at what these plans are. I mean, you said they have the coolest job in the world, the Riverfront Conservancy, that they get to kind of take a look.
That park would really put a stamp on that whole Riverfront effort, because it's enough room to really do, as we saw some cool things. You saw fishing piers and beaches, and you know, and a few years ago, if somebody had put something like that on the table, you thought, yeah, it never happened. But I mean, now you can almost, you know, bet we're going to see this.
I said recently that in my lifetime, the single biggest physical change in the city of Detroit is the waterfront. When I was a kid, I lived right near it, and it was all industrial. You never went down there for anything, and now you think of how much of it is actual recreation and has access for the people who live here. That's a really cool thing.
It could have been easy to for the city to use as a tax base, put some condos up there, some
Right.
but the fact that it's
Well,
going to
they
be
still can.
open for people.
They still can,
You
and
do it
that's the
back of the
design.
waterfront.
You do put the condos, the development, behind that park, and that was part of the reason the park
Yeah.
was built, to draw that kind of investment.
But you
Well,
don't
it's gonna
limit the access by keeping the
No.
waterfront.
And we'll keep you posted as to what plan they pick coming up this spring. And that's going to do it for My Week. Don't forget, next week we'll be on the road at the Detroit Policy Conference. We hope that you will join us for that. Plus, find us Facebook and Twitter during the week. Catch Nolan in the Detroit News, Stephen on WDET. I'm Christy McDonald. We'll see you next Thursday for My Week. Take care.
Did you know Gordon Food Service was started by a 23-year-old entrepreneur as a butter and egg delivery business more than a century ago? In 1948, school teacher Gerard Wendell Hayworth borrowed $10,000 from his parents to start a woodworking operation in his family's garage. It's now Hayworth Incorporated. These are just some of the ways Michigan's pioneers started out as small companies with big ideas.
We are business leaders for Michigan. We are committed to making Michigan a top 10 state for jobs, personal income, and a healthy economy. Masco Corporation is proud to manufacture innovative and environmentally friendly products for the home. Delta faucets, craft-made in Merillat cabinets, and Behr brand paints have all been designed with you in mind. Masco and its family of companies, serving Michigan communities since 1929. Funding for this program is provided by Delta Airlines. Keep climbing.